In this section, we're going to be taking one of our images from start to finish. It's going to include cutting our subjects out of the background using smart objects and creating an entire new background. It's going to be a great section, guys. Let's go ahead and jump into Photoshop. We're going to start off by opening our images for this section. Let's hit Control or Command O, and you can see we actually have two different images. Our first is our raw photo. Okay, this is what we're actually going to be working on. And next we have our final TIFF. Okay, this is basically our end goal. So we've included this so you can go ahead and take a look at it for your reference. All right, let's go ahead and start off with our raw photo. So we're going to hit Open here, and it's going to open up our Camera Raw dialog in Photoshop. So let's go ahead and do a couple of base adjustments on this image. All right, here we have our lens corrections. We'll click on Enable Lens Corrections. Okay, that looks pretty good. I'm going to bring our contrast up just a little bit. There we go. And we'll bring our highlights up just a little bit as well. And there we go. And maybe our clarity as well. All right, that looks great. So again, we're not doing a ton of adjustments here within our Camera Raw dialog. There we go. Just making some small changes. All right, let's go ahead and hit Open Image. Okay, now F for full screen, and let's go ahead and go over all the changes that we're going to make to this document, because it's quite a few. Now in this case, what we're actually doing, our goal for this document is to clean up our background and basically make this image like a very polished, refined version of this image, and then create a new background behind our subjects. So we've got a couple things we need to take into account here. Basically, our subjects were photographed on a white V-flat, so we see just a little bit of a seam in between the two V-flats there. Okay, now they were also photographed on this box that we had made for the photo shoot, and the box, it looks okay, but you can see there's all kinds of little details here, and here in the shadows you can see all kinds of the wood that was used wasn't very clean, so you can see a lot of texture and things like that in the wood, and in the background we can see all kinds of stuff like this going on with our seam there as well. All right. So there's actually quite a bit that we need to do to this image in order to have it look really, really clean. And that's our goal, is to have this image look very clean. Basically, I want our background and what they're sitting on and the floor, all of it to look perfectly clean. So we're going to do a lot of cutting out, and we're going to be doing a lot of replacement of the objects and the background in this photo. All right, guys, let's go ahead and jump in. So we're going to start off actually by giving our subjects a little bit more space. We didn't include the bottom of our subject's shoes. So let's hit C for the crop tool. All right, we're going to click here, and I'm going to just drag that down just a little bit to give our subjects a little bit more space. We're going to bring this down there, and I'm going to hold Alt or Option, and we're going to make our image just a little bit wider as well. All right, let's hit that checkbox there. Okay, so my subjects look great. They need to be cut out of their background. Basically, let's just delete this layer. Basically, I want to create a shape right here behind our subjects. So let's go ahead and create a new layer and fill it with a color here. Okay, we want to create a shape like this and have it be visible behind our subjects. Now, in order to do that, we need our subjects cut out of the backgrounds. All right, so let's go ahead and start cutting our subjects out of the background. Now, not only do we have to cut our subjects out, but we also have a shadow for our subjects as well. So we need to have those basically on two different layers. So our subjects are going to be on a normal layer, and then our shadow is going to be on a multiply layer, which is going to multiply it for everything that's on the background. Okay, guys, let's jump in. So again, we're going to start off by cutting our subjects out of their background. And there are a lot of ways to do this. We're going to start off with basically the simplest way and then work our way more advanced as we need. Okay, so let's go ahead and hit W. We're going to hit W for the magic wand tool, and see if we can start off by cutting some of our subjects out just by simply clicking here on our background. Okay, and you can see this area did a pretty good job cutting our subjects out. Now I'm going to hit Shift and click here because we don't want to include the shadow in this case. So we're just hitting Shift, clicking a few times. All right, let's go ahead and zoom in. I'm going to hit Shift, click there as well. Okay, that looks good. And let's go ahead and add this as well. Shift click some of these areas as well. All right. And again, my goal here is to get our subjects cut out from the background. Now, this isn't going to do a perfect job. You can see in this case, I just selected my subject's skin. So let's hit Undo. All right, undo a couple times. I'm going to lower my tolerance there. Okay, and now we're going to hit Shift and click a few times and see if we can have our selection actually just select out my background here. Now in this case, it's actually kind of like it's being a little bit difficult here. As I try to select more, you can see it keeps selecting my subject's skin. So this might be something that I have to actually use the pen tool to select instead of the magic wand tool. Alright, let's try it over here as well. We'll bring our tolerance up just a little bit more. Alright, and here we can see it's starting to include my subject's skin as well. So it looks like the area around our subject's legs, we're going to have to do this a little bit more manually. The magic wand tool is just not doing a good enough job, and that's pretty common whenever using the magic wand tool. Usually it does a great job, like especially, in this case where we have a very, clean white background and then a hard line for our subject's arm. It's going to do a great job there. But in a lot of other cases, like down here, it's not going to do as good of a job. All right, which is not a problem at all, because now we know how to use the pen tool, and we can use that for selections. Okay, so let's go ahead and modify our current selection. So our selection looks okay. Our edge is probably a little bit jagged. So we're going to hit Refine Edge here. There we go. Let's go ahead and bring up our feathering just a little bit, and then I'm going to bring my contrast up a little bit as well. And this is going to help smooth our edges out. All right, cool. Let's go ahead and hit OK there. All right, and now we're going to turn this into a layer mask. So we have our selection. Let's go ahead and click on our layer mask. All right, and now we're going to hit Controller Command I to invert our layer mask. All right, and now I'm just basically going to create a solid fill adjustment layer. So the color here, I want to actually get the color from our subject's background. So I'm going to hit Shift, click on the layer mask real quick. Okay, hit B for the brush tool, and then Alt or Option to sample this color. We'll just create a new layer there. We're going to sample this color, and then I can create a solid color fill layer using this exact same color, and then put this right below our subjects. Okay, now we're going to hit Shift and click, and there we go. So here are the subjects. They're roughly cut out of the background at this point. Okay, the upper part of our subjects is actually pretty good, but the lower part we definitely do need to refine, and we're going to do that with the pen tool. All right, so let's go ahead and jump in. We're going to start off by refining the upper edge of our subjects, and then we're going to go down a little bit lower. Okay, so let's click here on our layer mask. All right, next we're going to we're going to go to Select, and then down to Refine Mask. Now with the Refine Mask, we're going to go ahead and turn these values, we're going to move them back to 0. All right, we're going to use our Refine Radius tool. Okay, the Refine Radius tool is really great for painting around hair. So if you do have hair, there we go, that you need to cut out from your background, just simply paint over top of the hair after you've already made your selection. All right, there we go. And when I let go, it's going to do a really nice job finding the edge of the hair and cutting it out for me. Now, it's not going to do a perfect job, but it does a much better job than when we started. So let's go ahead and hit Show Original. There you can see there's the before, and there's the after with the hair. All right, and in this case, that's all we need, because we are going to actually be using a shadow of their hair, and it's all going to blend together really well. Okay, now our subjects look pretty good here. It's just really their legs are the areas, their legs and their shoes really need a bit of refinement here. So those are the areas we're going to focus on cutting out a little bit better. All right, let's go ahead and clean up some of this stuff before we get into that. So I'm going to click on my layer mask here. We're going to hit L, and L is for our lasso tool. We'll just go to our regular lasso tool in this case. And I'm just going to circle a couple areas that obviously shouldn't be visible on this layer. All right, so circle that, and I'm going to hit Shift Delete. We're going to fill that with black. There we go. All right, let's hit Command plus a couple times to zoom in. And we're going to do the same thing right over here. All right, selecting this area out. There we go. And Shift Delete, we're going to fill that with black there as well. Okay, and then anything, over here underneath this shoe, we're going to fill that with black as well. And this area over here as well. All right. Oh, you know what? I included a little bit of her leg there. So let's go ahead and hit Command D to deselect. And we're going to come in and make that just a little bit cleaner there. All right, and as I'm zoomed in here, I can actually hold down my space bar and move around my image. All right, and fill that with black. Okay, now let's go ahead and take a look at our layer mask. So I'm going to hold Alt or Option and click on our layer mask. All right, and this gives me a real clear idea of what my actual layer mask looks like. So you can see on the top of our selection here, looks pretty good. Even the hair looks totally fine for what we need it for right now. Okay, we just need to go ahead and fix up these areas around our subject's legs. All right, so I'm going to hold Alt or Option. We're going to click on that. And now we're going to focus on our subject here on the left side. All right, and I need to basically see what I'm doing here. I'm going to try to use the pen tool, okay, to kind of clean this edge up, but I can't see what I'm doing. So we're going to hold Shift and click on my layer mask, which is going to temporarily disable my layer mask, okay? And then once it's temporarily disabled, now I can come in here and make a much nicer pen path. Okay, well, let's hit P for the pen tool. Okay, here remember, pen paths are created over here in the area called paths. All right, we're going to click here and start dragging up in this direction. There we go, right around her thumb. Now remember, hold Control or Command to move any of these points at any point in time. All right, there we go. Bring it up to there, and we're actually going to go straight across here. All right. And bring this on down. So the pen tool really is the best tool for making accurate selections in Photoshop, because there are many times when, for instance, the difference between here and your subject just really isn't that much. It doesn't have that much contrast. So any of your automatic tools, like the Magic Wand tool or the Quick Selection tool, things like that, they're just not going to do a great job. And this is when your pen tool really shines, because your pen tool, you have complete control over where your selection is. So with that control, you can basically just, use your eyes and determine the exact edges of your subjects. All right. There we go. And we're going to bring this up. And it'll be clear in a minute why we're, taking the time to cut our subjects out of the background. Because basically we need to recreate the shadows of this image. There we go. Because the shadows have all this detail in here, so basically I need to basically recreate those from scratch. And in order to do that, I have to have my subjects cut out from the background, because they need to be on a different layer. All right. Now obviously each individual image you edit in Photoshop is going to require its own set of challenges and its own set of rules when editing. This is not something that you're going to have to do with all of your images. So this is why we've included a bunch of different images in the exercises with Photoshop 101, 201, and 301, so you get an idea of all kinds of different techniques and requirements for editing different types of images. And obviously the way I'm cutting my subjects out here is the same way you would cut subjects out for any photo. All right. The pen tool is always going to be the pen tool. All right, and I'm actually going to include this little shadow there. We're going to bring this up there. All right, I want to make sure we do include this shadow here as well. All right, and we're going to go on over and up. We're going to go straight across here again. And then we're going to come down, and I'm going to go ahead and select out this subject as well. So spending a bit of time here with the pen tool early on. And I know sometimes the pen tool, it's like, man, that seems like it takes forever. And sometimes it does take a while. But there really is no better way to get really perfect selections in Photoshop. So sometimes you just kind of have to spend the time to do it. All right. Now we could definitely go in here with like a brush tool or a lasso tool, and we could get okay edges. We could definitely get something that's like, looks just fine, but you won't get something that looks as clean as the pen tool. There we go. Now in this case, we're actually missing part of our subject's shoes, so this is kind of fun. We actually get to figure out how to replace that. All right, I'm going to click here and drag out in that way. All right, and we're going to drag out in this way as well. There we go. We're going to be replacing part of our subject's shoe in this image, which is kind of fun. All right, there we go. Now, thankfully, our magic wand tool worked pretty well in the upper part of the image, so we don't have to use our pen tool to cut out the upper portion of our subjects. All right, and again, the pen tool is really great for when you have hard edges, like like what we're working with right now. But things like hair, that's not the best use of the pen tool, because a hair, that's considered like a soft edge. So if you're trying to cut out like hair or clouds or something like that, there are other tools that are much better, like the Refine Radius tool that we just used a minute ago. That's going to be a lot better than the pen tool because it's better for soft edges. All right, there we go. Okay, and I have my, there we go. I have my option, my rubber band option turned on, which gives me a little preview. It's right over here. You can click here and go down to rubber band, and you'll get a little preview of what you're actually going to be making. We went over that in the pen tool section of Photoshop 3.1. All right, I'm going to move this around, Control or Command, to kind of just move that into place. And whenever I'm cutting a subject out, I tend to err slightly inside of my subject, like rather, so this would be outside, this would be inside. I tend to err slightly inside of the subject, and that just helps basically remove like a fringe on the outside of your subject. Sometimes when you cut a person out of the background, you'll have what's called a fringe, which is basically like a thin, like white or black line, like right on the outside of your subject, and that's why I tend to like select out right inside of my subject's skin, so we won't include like the white from our backgrounds, for instance. You can see it's going to end with my subject's skin. All right, and these selections don't have to be perfect. It's not something you need to spend like all day making sure like every single pixel is perfect. There are a lot of things that you can do, to help. There we go. To help kind of clean them up after you've created them. Okay, great. So now we just did a pretty good job cutting our subjects out. So let's go ahead and we're going to go all the way down around here. Okay, just click a few times. All right, hold down our space bar to kind of move around our document even while we're zoomed in. And you know what? I'm going to go ahead and cut our hand out as well. Why not? We're already using our pen tool. Might as well just do this for a little bit more time. All right, Alt or Option whenever we need to create a sharp edge. There we go. Alt or Option again to kind of bring that back in. There we go. Alt or Option again. We've basically just got a bunch of like little kind of bumps there. There we go. And kind of bring that all together again. Okay, great. So we just spent all that time cutting our subjects out of the background. Let's go ahead and make sure we save this work path. So we're going to double click here, and I'm just going to call it subjects 1. Okay, so we just spent this time creating a path around our subject's legs. Now we can turn this path into a selection and then use that selection on the layer mask to perfectly cut out our subjects. So here's our pen path. We can right click here and go down to Make Selection. Now in this case, we're going to feather this by 0.5 pixels. If you don't feather your radius at all, it gives you like a really hard edge, and it usually doesn't look natural. So we're going to feather this by 0.5 pixels and hit OK. There we go. Now back here on our layers, I'm going to hit Shift. Sorry, we're going to click on our layer. And I know that all of this area we actually want to be black, right? We don't want any of this to be visible on our subjects. Okay, so I'm going to hit Shift Delete on our layer mask, and we're going to fill all that with black. Okay, now if you guys remember, we have all this like this area and stuff like that, right? These like jagged bits of information here. We actually want to invert our selection. So let's go to select. Sorry, we're inverse, not invert. Select and down to inverse. So now, instead of selecting everything outside of our subject, you can see if I just create a new layer here, we're selecting our actual subject. So there we go. This is what our subjects actually are. Here we go. So now, here on our layer mask, we're going to basically just paint with our brush tool. We're going to paint white in that selection. And it's going to make sure that our subjects are visible in that area. All right, so we'll just go ahead and paint right around the edges there. All right, and it's good. Just make sure that, there we go, our subjects have really nice edges. All right, now I'm going to hit Control Command H, and that's going to temporarily hide my selection. Okay, now I can zoom in and see our edge of our selection. Look how nice that is. It really is a perfect selection around your subjects. This is not something that you'd be able to get with any other tool except for the pen tool. Okay, because we basically accurately traced every line right around our subjects here, and then we're using that to define our layer mask. Okay, so Control Command D to deselect. Now I'm going to hold Alt or Option and take a look at my layer mask. And we can see this is our layer mask. So from the bottom all the way up to the top and even the hair, we have a really nice layer mask. All right, so let's go ahead and use our Marquee tool. Now I'm going to go ahead and select out these areas here, just holding the Shift key to add to my selections. And then here on my layer mask, I'm going to hit Shift, Delete, and we're going to fill that with black. Okay, so now we have a very nice selection around our subjects. I'm going to hold Alt or Option. There we go, click on our subjects, and you can see they're perfectly cut out from our background. Okay, guys, now that was the hardest part of this whole tutorial. Cutting out your subject is usually the hardest part for this type of work. So now that our subjects are cut out from their backgrounds, we can go ahead and start recreating our background from scratch. This time, it's not going to be different photo elements. It's not going to be like a box we made out of plywood, and it's not going to be some, foam core we put on the background. Instead, we're going to make all this in Photoshop, which means it's going to be very clean and precise. All right, let's go ahead and jump back in. Okay, to start with here, we're going to hold Shift and click on our layer mask, which is going to give us a brief idea of what our background actually looks like here. Okay, so Shift, click on your layer mask. Now we've got a few different elements that I need to go ahead and work on recreating. Okay, elements like my box here, and elements like my floor. All right, let's go ahead and start off with the floor. So we're going to use all these. We're going to create a bunch of color fill adjustment layers. So hit B for the brush tool. All right, and I'm going to hold Alt or Option and sample my floor color here. Maybe we'll just sample this darker color here. Okay, and then I'm going to make a new color fill adjustment layer. So remember, this one we're going to use for our background. Now the next one we're going to use for our floor. Okay, so let's go to our adjustment layers and solid color. All right, I'm going to hit OK. And then I'm going to use my Marquee tool. All right, and we're going to make a selection right around here. Now I do want to use my shadow here. So the shadow, I want to make sure that I can use that from my original image. Okay, so I want to make sure that I'm actually selecting right there between the floor and the wall. Okay, that looks great. So here on our layer mask, basically, I don't need any of this visible on this layer. Let's make this invisible there. Okay, I want this only to be visible right here. Okay, so let's click on our layer mask. I have my selection. I can hit Command I, and it's going to invert my selection. Okay, but now I actually want the opposite of this. So we're going to hit Control or Command D. That's going to deselect. And now I can simply click on my layer mask and invert my entire layer mask. And then we have our floor and our wall. So let's go ahead and make our subjects visible. Shift click on the layer mask, and there we have. We have our floor and our wall. Pretty cool. All right, now let's go ahead and create the box that's underneath our subjects. All right, so shift click on our subjects again. Okay, again, we need to grab our color here of our box. So I'm going to hold Alt or Option and grab this color here. Okay, you can also just simply go to your eyedropper tool. All right, I usually just hit B for the brush tool and then Alt or Option. That's a simple way to do it for me, but you guys can use whatever technique you're comfortable with. Okay, now let's go ahead and make a selection. So we're going to make a selection here around the area we want to be the box of our subject. The box our subjects are sitting on, rather. Okay. There we go. And move that out just a little bit. That looks great. So now that I have this selection active, I'm going to click on Adjustment Layers. We're going to go to Solid Color. Okay, it's going to load as this color, and it's going to load that exact selection as a layer mask. Okay, so let's go ahead and make our subjects invisible. Okay, so here we have our background. There we go, background. We have our floor and our box. Let's shift click on our subjects now again, and here we can see our subjects are now sitting on this box. Okay, they're sitting on the box that we just created. Pretty cool. All right, what's the next thing we need to recreate? Well, let's hold Shift and click on our subjects here. Okay, looks pretty good. Now we do have a little bit of a gradient here between the floor and the background. Let's go ahead and work on creating that. All right, so let's click that invisible. Now here's our floor, okay, and here's our background. So between those layers, we're going to create a new layer. I'm going to hit M for my marquee selection tool. We're going to go ahead and make a selection there. I'm going to hit G for my gradient tool. Now we're going to use a linear gradient. Okay, let's use a foreground to transparent linear gradient. Hit OK. All right, and now our color, let's go ahead and grab this color and go a little bit darker here. So I can simply bring our brightness, change that from 80, I can go down to 30. There we go. Now, all I'm going to need to do is hold down the Shift key and go from the bottom up just a little bit. You know what? That's a little bit too much. So let's go a little bit less. There we go. And all right, that looks pretty good. So we have a little bit of a gradient there. We're basically trying to replicate what's going on here. Okay? Looks okay, except we need to, let's go ahead and bring this down just a little bit. So I'm going to use my Move tool and hit the down arrow a couple times. Okay? And then we need to bring our opacity a little bit lower. We're trying to make this look real. All right, cool. So there we have our, all right, little bit of a gradient between our background and our floor. I'll make that a little bit less visible. All right, but it does make it look real, a little bit more real with some kind of shadow in there. All right, now our subject's back visible again. So the next thing I want to do is go ahead and use the shadow on my subjects as a multiply layer. All right, so let's go ahead and duplicate our subjects. I'm going to hit Control-Command-J to duplicate our subjects out. Okay, and then on this layer, okay, we're going to change the layer blend mode on this layer to multiply. All right, so we have a normal layer and a multiply layer. Now the multiply layer, this is for our shadow. Okay, so I want my subjects to be visible in the, I want my shadow to be visible in this area. All right, so I have a few ways of doing that. Now, when it came to cutting out our subjects, I really wanted that edge to be very precise, okay, because our subjects have a really hard edge. Now, the shadows don't have a hard edge, so I don't have to be as precise when I'm creating this shadow. Okay, so here we go. This is our shadow here. I can do this in a bunch of different ways. Now, the easiest way here is probably just to hit W for the Magic Wand tool. All right, let's go ahead and make this entire layer visible. So I'm going to hit D for our default colors. Okay, I'm going to click on my background here. I'm going to hit Shift-Delete and fill our background with white. There we go. Okay, now with our Magic Wand tool, I'm just going to simply click outside of our subjects, and I'm going to fill that area with black. So Shift-Delete, and we're going to fill this with black. There we go. So here are, this is just going to be our subject's shadows. So again, we have our subjects here and our shadows. All right. Now the shadows, we're going to change this. We've already changed this to a multiply layer. So anything that I put underneath it, for instance, if I grab a orange color here and paint with my brush tool, you're going to see that's what it looks like. So our multiply layer, okay, the shadows are showing up over top of that. And then here we have a regular layer, and this is just our subjects. Okay, so they're not going to show up where we have our orange in the background. Okay, cool. So now clicking on our shadow group, what we're going to do is I'm going to go to Select and down to Refine Mask, because I want this edge to be a little bit softer here. So we're going to bring up our feathering just a little bit. There we go, and hit OK. And now we have a much more realistic edge around our subjects. All right, now let's go ahead and zoom out. we don't need any of this area, like you can see if I turn this off and on, okay, we don't need any of this area, like that line there, what's going on here in the floor, all this stuff. We don't need any of that. So let's click on our layer mask. I'm going to paint black on my layer mask with my brush tool here. Okay, we don't need any of this stuff. And now normally, if these shadows on the box were relatively smooth, I would say let's go ahead and keep those. But in this case, you can see the shadows on the box, they don't really have any detail, like they have too much detail rather. So all this detail on the box, I really want this to be like a very clean image, like everything was like, you know, almost like totally clean and pure. So this, the shadows in this case, they're kind of like throwing it off. I actually don't want that to be visible in this image. Okay, so we're going to have to recreate those shadows in a new way, which means we don't need them to be visible here. All right, so let's go ahead and paint this black here on this layer. Okay, we don't need this shadow layer visible for those shadows there because we're going to wind up recreating those shadows. All right, I'm going to hit Control or Command and click on my box itself. All right, because I don't want this layer visible where my box is. So we're going to click on our layer, hit Shift Delete, and fill that with black. Command D to deselect. Okay, and now remember we still have this area here on our background. Okay, now this I actually don't want either because see we have a lot of detail here. We have this detail where it looks like the floor is meeting the wall. Okay, it's kind of messy there. This I don't want, and not only that, but our wall doesn't actually connect all the way down here, right? Our wall comes down over here. So what we are going to do is I'm going to click on my layer mask, okay, and I'm going to paint black all the way to the area that actually looks good. Okay, so we'll just paint it over here. All right, something right about there. And we're going to recreate the shadow that goes from here all the way down. All right, so this looks pretty good. Now we've got our subjects on background here. So this is our background. All right, we've got a little bit of a gradient there. Now let's go ahead and throw in, I'm going to make a selection here. We're going to go ahead and throw in a color here on our subjects on the background, just so you get an idea of what we're actually going to be doing with this. Okay, that looks pretty good. Let's grab an adjustment layer. I'm going to go to solid color. All right, and then we're going to go nice and light with this. All right, there we go. So you can see I put that behind our subjects and behind the box that they're sitting on. Now this layer is our shadow layer, okay, and it's set to multiply. Remember, if I set this to normal, this is what it looks like, okay? It just looks like they're, you know, plain shadows here on the background. But because I set this to multiply, there we go. Now it's actually absorbing the color that's behind our subjects. All right, so that looks great. We still have a few more things to do. We got to fix this shadow down here. We got to recreate the shadows on their legs. We got to add in the little bit of shoe that's missing there. And I do have some things we need to clean up with our hair. But we're doing pretty good. All right, guys, let's go ahead and jump in and recreate the shadow on the bottom left part of this image. So let's go ahead and recreate that shadow. Now, this is a perfect opportunity to use smart objects. So let's zoom in a couple of times here. All right, here's our background. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to click on my layer itself. Now, we have our layer, okay, and we have our layer mask. Now, in this case, what I'm going to do is we're simply going to right-click here, and I'm going to go down to Apply Layer Mask. So we're going to go ahead and apply the layer mask. So I want to take this shadow and just drag it down a little bit. All right, so let's grab our marquee tool. I'm going to select out this area and hit Control or Command T, and then I can just kind of stretch this shadow down a little bit, which is kind of cool. All right, there we go. And let's hit Enter and Command D to deselect. So our shadow's just kind of stretched down there a little bit. All right, now I'm going to change my layer back from multiply to normal. Okay, and now I need a shadow that goes from here. Okay, I need a shadow that goes from here to my wall. All right, so we're going to use our polygonal lasso tool. We're going to click here and go all the way down here. There we go. Let's go ahead and click up there. So this is my selection here. Basically, I need this area to look like it's creating this shadow here. So on a new layer, I'm going to use my brush tool, B for the brush tool. We're going to hold Alt or Option, and I'm going to sample this shadow color, and then I'm going to start painting it over here. So let's hit Control or Command H to temporarily hide our selection. All right, and then I can just erase it away here on the edge there. Okay, so there's our shadow. Now I don't want my shadow to be visible in front of my box. Remember, this is my box here, right? The box that they're sitting on. Obviously, I don't want the shadow to be visible there. So we're going to hit Control or Command and click on our box, all right? And then this layer, we're going to click and put a layer mask on our layer. And we're going to hit Control or Command I to invert the layer mask. Okay, so then this layer basically, all right, we're good to go. Now our shadow here, let's go ahead and we can see there's a couple little areas where we don't have a really clean line here, okay? And that's our shadow. All right, so let's hold Control or Command. Basically, the shadow doesn't reach far enough out to cover where the box is. So what I need to do is click on my shadow group itself, okay? I'm going to go to sample the current layer, and I'm going to hit S for the clone stamp tool. We're going to sample the current layer, and I'm going to hold Alt or Option, and I'm just going to sample from the left and paint into the right a little bit there. Basically, I'm just trying to clean that edge up. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're like, you're not cleaning the edge up at all, man. You just made that much worse. That's okay, though. Now, I've went ahead and painted from the left to the right. So to get that gone again, just hold Control or Command and click on the box. Okay? And then I'm just going to hit Delete on this layer and then deselect. And now you can see we have a really nice edge. The reason the edge wasn't as nice is because this layer actually didn't extend all the way to the box. It was coming just to the left of the box because it was using basically the information from my original box instead of my Photoshop box. Okay, cool. So now we have this layer as our shadow layer, okay, and we have this layer as our background shadow. Now in this case, I want the shadow to look like it doesn't have a lot of blur here, but it is more blurred where it reaches the shadow on the wall. That's kind of how shadows work, right? Like they're going to be harder where the source is, and then they kind of like feather out. So this is a perfect opportunity to use our field blur. So let's go ahead and click on this layer here. All right, we're going to go to Filter, down to Blur Gallery, and over to Field Blur. All right, now here in our Field Blur, I'm going to click on our blur point here, our blur center. We're going to go ahead and bring this down, okay, because we don't want a lot of blur here. But I'm going to click here again, right over here, and we can add a bit more blur. All right, so this is a really nice way, there we go, to go from no blur to a lot, to kind of a lot of blur there. And this is going to help us actually blur get our background where we need it. All right, that looks pretty good. So let's go ahead and hit OK there. All right. Cool, looking good. Now we do have an area here that looks a little bit weird. Let's hold Alt or Option and click on our layer mask, and you can see that that field blur actually blurred my layer mask as well. Now, if you blur a layer, it's also going to blur a layer mask unless they're unlinked. So let's go ahead and undo that real quick. Let's unlink those so I can blur just my layer, and my layer mask I want to stay totally intact. All right. Before I do that, I just want to erase out this little guy right here because we don't need that little one. Okay. So let's click on our layer. Again, we're going to go to Filter, Blur Gallery, and Field Blur. All right, let's bring our original blur center here and apply a very small blur. And then here, we'll apply a bit larger blur. There we go, to make it actually look like it blurs out there. All right, and you can see it's not blurring my layer mask now because I unlinked them. All right, hit OK. Okay, pretty cool, huh? So now we have this area, all right, going from our floor to our wall, and now basically we want these both of these layers to be set as multiply layers. Now, if I set this one as a multiply, looks good, okay? And if I set this one as a multiply, it's going to look good for the most part, except where they overlap. Okay. Now that overlap is really tricky, and it's actually not a big deal. I could either merge both of these layers together, Or I could create a smart object out of both of these layers and then set that smart object as a multiply blend mode. So that's what we're going to do here because it's non-destructive. Okay, cool. So let's go ahead and change both of those layers back to normal. Click here, go back to normal. There we are. Now I'm going to shift click both of these layers. We're going to right click and go to convert to smart object. Now remember, I can edit this smart object at any time simply by double clicking on the smart object thumbnail. Alright, so now that both of these layers are essentially one layer, they're a smart object, I can set them both to a multiply. There we go, and we get exactly what we want, which is pretty cool. Alright guys, so we're actually really close to where we need to go. Let's go ahead and crop this image a little bit different. C for the crop tool, we're going to just crop in from the right there a little bit. There we go, and we'll give us a little bit more space here on the top. Alright, and hit enter there. Cool, and because I'm using fill adjustment layers, they're going to automatically fill to wherever I need them. Alright, there we go. Looks like we have a little bit of information here on the very top of our image. So let's just select out that information here. On our layer mask, hit Shift Delete and fill that with black. Alright, cool. Alright, looks like we have the same thing on this adjustment layer. Sorry, on this smart object now. So we can simply put a layer mask on that smart object. Select out this area and hit Shift Delete and fill that with black as well. Alright, looking pretty good. So we've got our subjects cut out from the background. We've completely recreated our background and it looks a lot cleaner than our original. Now we still have to create the shadows around our subject's legs and clean up the shadow behind their head, and then we're going to do a little bit more to the background, and then we're going to be done. Alright, let's go ahead and jump in and recreate the shadows beneath their legs. Alright, and to do this we can use the pen tool. So we're going to start off, again, we have our subjects here. I'm going to hold Shift and click on our layer mask. Okay, it's going to make our layer mask back visible again. And then here, basically I can recreate their shadows easily with the pen tool. So hit P for the pen tool. There we go. We're going to start clicking and dragging around our shadows. Now shadows are a lot easier to create with the pen tool than cutting your subjects out because they have really soft edges and they're shadows. Like you don't have to do a perfect job here. Alright, there we go. Let's go ahead and even that out there. Alright, bring that up there. Kind of bring this down here. And then we get to kind of like make this one up because we couldn't even see it to begin with. Alright, there we go. That looks good. Okay. Alright. There we go here. We're going to go up around there. And down in this direction now. Alright, I'm going to hold Alt or Option because we kind of need to come back in this direction now. There we go. Alright, zooming in here, and I'm going to make the shadow for her hand as well. Alright, so if you guys were worried that you weren't going to get enough pen tool experience with these exercises, wow, worries be gone. There we go. Let's go ahead and go back up here. Make sure we're including this shadow here as well. Alright, going up there. And then we want to connect with our original point, which is right over here. Okay, great. So now that that's a pen path, let's go ahead and call it our shadow. So it's called a work path right now. We're going to double click here, and we're going to call it shadow. Okay, now we're going to right click here and go to make selection. Let's feather this by 0.5 pixels. That sounds good. Okay, and on a layer underneath our subjects here, all right, let's go ahead and create a new layer. what we're going to do is simply paint with the original colors here in my image. So Alt or Option, we're going to paint with our colors. Let's actually make this right above our subjects. So Alt or Option to sample what's going on here, okay? And by painting with the original colors in the shadow, this is going to help me create a little bit more realistic of a shadow. All right, there we go. But you can see now I don't have any of my texture, the texture that I didn't want. Obviously, I don't have any of it if I'm just going to be painting with the brush tool, right? All right, there we go. And just make sure we've covered all the areas we want to cover here. All right, cool, looks good. So let's hit Control or Command D to deselect. So now, basically, on its own layer, we have just those shadows. You know what, before I deselect, I'm just going to make sure I fill these in. I just want to make sure that we've got all the shadow detail we need here. Even though part of this area is going to be under our subject's legs, I just want to make sure we have it all filled in. All right. Cool. And I'm just using a soft edge round brush here. All right, that looks great. So now we can hit Control or Command D to deselect. And so that's our shadows here. All right, we have our subjects. Let's go ahead and shift-click on the layer mask for our subjects and bring the shadows beneath our subjects. Pretty cool, huh? So basically, we just completely made these shadows from scratch by tracing out the original shadows. Okay. Now what we're going to do is we're going to be applying a field blur to these shadows as well, because some area of these shadows are actually quite a bit blurred, but some of the areas are not blurred, okay? The field blur is going to allow us to blur some areas more than others. So we're going to convert it into a smart object first, and then we're going to use our field blur. So let's go ahead and right-click here. We're going to convert this to a smart object, okay? And then we're going to go to Field Blur in just 1 second, but before I do, I want to analyze my original shadows. So we're going to hold Shift and click here and just kind of get an idea of like, okay, they're not so blurred up here at the top. You know, this guy on the right, see how this is more blurred than this one here because the foot is actually farther, okay? And this one is more blurred than the one here on the left. All right, so let's go ahead and Shift-click our layer mask there again. We've already got this as a smart object, so we're going to go to Filter, Blur Gallery, and over to Field Blur again. All right, now here we have our general blur. This is going to just give a blur on everything on this layer. All right, let's go up just a little bit more. We want to kind of match, there we go, match our original. All right, that looks pretty good. Now, in this case, we're going to click here. All right, we're going to give this a little bit less blur. And then I'm going to click over here, and I want to give this one a little bit more blur. All right, so we have more blur on the shoe that's further away. We're going to do the same thing over here. We're going to give this a little bit more blur. And I'm going to click here, and we're going to give that a little bit less blur again. Maybe more blur towards the edge because it's a little bit farther away there. All right, cool. So you can see, let's click here and give that a little bit more blur towards the edge. So you can see now using the field blur, I'm able to get different amounts of blur in different parts of my shadow, which really helps to recreate a more realistic shadow. All right, so let's go ahead and hit OK there. All right, let's hit Command Z. So there's the before. We have just really hard edge shadows. Command Z, and there's the after. Now, again, because we used a smart filter, I can turn this off and on at any point in time. And I can just double click right here where it says Blur Gallery, and I can actually change that at any point in time as well. All right, so let's turn our background shadow on. So now we've got shadows behind our subjects. We've got shadows on our subject's legs. That looks pretty cool. Now we're going to go ahead and fill in our subject's shoe on the bottom. You can see we've got a little bit of a missing area on our subject's shoe. Okay, so what we're going to do is I'm actually going to duplicate this layer. We're going to take this part of the shoe and we're going to put it over here. So let's duplicate this layer. All right, and I'm going to right click and go to Apply Layer Mask. Okay, because I don't need the layer mask anymore. I need this cutout area of the shoe. So I've applied the layer mask here. Okay, And now, as a matter of fact, I don't need most of the shoe. I can just select out just what I need and hit Control or Command J to duplicate that selection to a new layer. So you can see now on a layer I just have this, okay? And then I'm just going to delete this copy. All right, so we just have this shoe now. All right, let's hit Control or Command T. There we go. We can see about maybe flipping it horizontally. Now let's flip it back the other way. All right. That looks great there. All right, and now zooming in, basically I want this to be warped to look like the original one. So let's go ahead and convert this to a smart object, because remember, if you're going to warp, using a smart object will allow you to get back to your original point if you need to. So we're going to right click here and go to Convert to a Smart Object. There we go. Now I'm going to lower our opacity a little bit. We're going to put it where we want and hit Control or Command T. We're going to right click and go to Warp. All right, cool. And now we're going to start warping our shoe into place. There we go. Let's go ahead and bring it down there. All right, let's bring this point out just a little bit. All right, and by having the opacity just a little bit lower, I can see what I'm doing a little bit better. All right, let's see if that works. Let's hit this checkbox up there, okay? We'll bring our opacity all the way up to 100. I'm going to hold Alt or Option and click on my layer mask, which is going to make that into a black layer mask. Okay, and then I'm just going to paint white right over here on my layer mask. All right, and there we go. We just painted a new bottom of our shoe right into this image. So we cut out the shoe on accident, and now we're replacing it back again. Now in this area it looks a little bit fuzzy, so let's go ahead and create a new layer above that. We're going to use our clone stamp tool. So S for the clone stamp tool. Let's make sure we're sampling our current layer and below. All right, and we'll just paint that right back in. There we go. And we'll have all the detail of our original. Just erase this point out there. All right, pretty cool, huh? So we just basically added that, all right, as a little bit of, we basically added that shoe back into our image. So here's our subject. Now we have our subject, and we have all these layers here. Now, if I wanted to bring all these together, what we could do is shift-click our subject, all right, all these layers, and group those together. So Control or Command G to group those together. We're just going to double-click here, and I'm going to call that subject. Okay, so now I know everything inside of here is our subject. All right. Next we have, okay, this is our legs, okay, and our background. These are both shadows, right? So I'm going to shift-click both of those layers, hit Control or Command G to group those together, and we're going to call that shadow. Okay, and then all of these layers are for the background, right? So we're going to shift-click all of these layers and hit Control or Command G, group those together. Okay, and I'm going to double-click and call this background. All right, and then what's on this layer one? Nothing. All right, guys, we're almost done here. All we have to do left is fix a little bit of selection around the hair, and then we're going to fill in some more detail here in the background. All right, guys, we're in the finishing stretches. Let's go ahead and jump back in. So we do need to clean this area up here around our subject. Now, let's go ahead and open up our subject group. Okay, there we go. And here we have our subject. Now, remember, we have a copy of our subject underneath here in our shadow group. Okay, this is the shadow for our subject. So let's make our subject invisible and back visible again. And you can see that because our multiply layer here actually blends in the hair with the background, that it does a pretty good job even around the edges here. So here where our subject is cut out of her background, I'm going to hold Alt or Option, okay, and take a look at the layer mask for our subject. All right. Now, the layer mask, I don't actually want to edit the layer mask here because we do have a nice layer mask. So if I want to apply a new layer mask to my subject, this is a great time to actually use a smart object. Okay, so I can right click here. We can go to Convert to Smart Object. Now it's going to go ahead and put the layer and the layer mask as a smart object. So I can always go back and edit that layer mask at any point in time. Okay, so now that the layer and the layer mask are their own smart object, I can put a new layer mask on here. All right, And I'm going to just simply paint black right around the edges, which is going to make this invisible right over here. But that's not really a big deal because right underneath it, there we go. All right, I've got that multiply adjustment layer that's kind of taking care of the hair and the color for me, which is pretty cool. All right, there we go. And we can do the same thing around the dress here. All right, let's go ahead and make that invisible there. All right, looks like this is not, there we go. Looks like we can't include all the way back down to there. Not a big deal. We can do this in a different way. All right, this one we can go ahead and include. It looks like the shadow group here that we had for our shadow, looks like this didn't include this area with the dress. Yeah, so if I make this invisible, you can see this does not include that area of the dress. Now this is a smart object, so let's go ahead and double click here on my smart object to edit the smart object. Okay, which is this layer and, all right, it's this layer and the other one. Oh, but you know what? I went ahead and applied my layer mask. So this is a case when I wish that instead of having applied my layer mask earlier, that I would have just created a smart object instead of applying my layer mask. Not a big deal. So let's go ahead and close this out. It would have been nice to have the option to do that, but in this case, it's not really that big of a deal. Okay, but I do want to be able to blend the background color in with this dress color. So in this case, what I'm going to do is create a new layer here, hit B for my brush tool, and I'm going to grab my background color. There we go. Paint it over top my dress, and then we're going to change our blend mode from normal down to darken. Okay, there we go. And you're going to see it's going to simply darken any areas that it can. Let's try multiply and see how that looks. A little bit too dark there. Now if I clip this to my subject's dress, there we go. That works. So setting this to a multiply blend mode, simply it will not allow you to darken any areas of your image. Okay, so in this case it wasn't going to darken the black that's in my dress already. Okay, but it did darken the white areas. Now, when it's not clipped, it looks like this, because it's actually darkening my background as well. But Option-Command-G to clip to just my subject. There we go. And now it is just affecting that area. Okay, pretty cool. So our image is looking great, guys. We have our subjects cut out from our background. Our background is basically perfect. I mean, it's completely made up. We made the entire thing in Photoshop. All right, and now here in our background, we're going to do one more thing. We're going to go ahead and, there we go. Let's go ahead and add a gradient in here. So we're going to create a solid color adjustment layer. All right, I'm going to choose the color that's in our subject shirt. I'm going to hit Option-Command-G, and that's going to clip this now here. Okay, and then I'm going to hit G for my gradient tool. We're going to use our foreground to transparent gradient. All right, we're going to use our linear gradient, and I'm going to just shift click from the top down to the bottom. There we go, just to give this a little bit more, all right, a little bit more of a cool effect there, that nice gradient effect. All right, now the last thing we're going to do here is actually want to add some lines into the background. So to do that, we're going to create a new layer. I'm going to hit M for my marquee tool and make a thin, there we go, a thin rectangular marquee. All right, looking good. Now I'm going to go ahead and fill that with our background color. So B for the brush tool, and then Alt or Option to sample that color. And then I'm going to go ahead and hit Shift Delete to fill inside of this selection with our foreground color. Oh, for some reason, there. Let's go ahead. It's filling in with my background color. So let's click our background color and hit OK. And there we go. I went ahead and filled that in with our background color. All right. So basically, we just have a thin line behind our subjects. Okay, now I'm going to use step and repeat to repeat this over again. Okay, so anytime you basically have one shape and you want to create many of those shapes, you can use step and repeat to basically copy it over and over and over again. Okay, so to use it step and repeat, all right, simply hold Option and Command and hit T. Okay, that brings up our step. And you can see it has a transform dialog right around it, or transform arrows. So I'm going to just hit the down arrow a few times. There we go. That looks pretty good. And hit enter. Okay, so Option Command T, and then I transformed it. Now, if I want to reapply that again, I'm going to hold Shift Option Command T, and it's going to reapply that over and over again. If you guys are on a PC, it's going to be Shift, Alt, and Control. I had to look at my things. It's going to be Shift, Alt, and Control, and T. And every time you hit T, it's going to apply that same transformation over and over again. Okay, and it's called a step and repeat. All right, so Shift, Option, Command, T, and each time I do this, it's basically going to copy this over and over again. All right, now in this case, it also is going to duplicate our layer over and over again. Okay, so you can see it duplicated our layer a bunch. We'll just shift-click on all those layers and hit Controller-Command E to merge those together. There we go. And then I'm going to kind of space this out evenly with our background, just to create a little bit of a kind of a cool effect there in our background. And because we did such a cool job cutting out the hair here, it's going to work perfectly even with the hair in the background. All right, let's go ahead and make our subject back visible and just see if we need to go ahead. Maybe I just need to fill in our layer masks, all right, in a couple of places here, just to make sure that, all right, our subject hair extends all the way where we need it to. All right, cool. That looks great, guys. Now, here with that, let's go ahead and close our subject back down. All right, we have our background group here. We could still take this layer if I wanted to and hit Controller-Command T. We can rotate this around. So if we want vertical lines, we can have horizontal or diagonal lines, whatever we want. In this case, I think the horizontal lines look pretty good. All right, cool. Now let's go ahead and take a look. So basically we're done here, and you can see our image, it looks really, really clean. I mean, basically we made the entire thing in Photoshop. So let's go ahead and take a look at our original. I'm just going to go back to our subject group. We're going to double click on our subject. All right, this is going to open up our subject in a new document because she is a smart object. They are a smart object, I guess. And I'm going to shift click here on that layer. So you can see, it's relatively similar to our original. We have our subjects. They have the shadow. They're sitting on a box. But now, in this case, we have our background. You can see it's completely clean. It's one color. We were able to add this element here behind our subjects, which is really cool. Okay, we still have the shadows intact. Now, the shadows where our subject's feet are, as well as the box they're sitting on, is completely clean. So rather than this box that they were sitting on originally, it's completely clean. The floor and everything here is completely clean as well. Okay, and we even have a little bit more information in the photo because here the original, her shoe was cut off, and here we actually added the shoe back in. All right, so really, really cool stuff that we can do with our image. So basically this was an exercise on completely recreating a photo from scratch. Guys, I hope you enjoyed this exercise. Thanks so much for following along. We learned a ton and used our smart objects and our filters and a lot of our knowledge from Photoshop 301 combined together to finish this image. Guys, thanks so much for watching. We'll see you in the next section. Bye, everyone.